The investigation into pandemic-related fraud in Minnesota, including cases involving members of the Somali community, is still unfolding, and the total amount of money involved may end up being much higher than early estimates of $1 billion.
I'm from Minneapolis, and Somalians are just part of the culture here. And also, over the past few years, I've noticed that I see a lot of them with new cars. So I'm a handyman, and I worked on a lot of Section 8 housing to make sure they're up to standard. And I always wondered how someone on Section 8 can afford multiple new cars. I just couldn't put it together.
Whistleblowers have suggested the total amount of fraud across various COVID assistance programs could potentially reach as high as $8 billion.
When I find out that people take advantage of the American people's generosity, it makes me want to knee someone in the groin.
Fox News has obtained photos of one of the Somali illegal immigrants wrapped up in the Minnesota fraud scandal, posing with several high-profile Minnesota Democrats, including Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz. The man pictured is Abdul Dahir Ibrahim.
Hannibal here, and I have to say again, Minnesota is completely cooked. Remember when we thought this fraud scandal was just going to be $1 billion? Cute, right? Pocket change. Turns out whistleblowers are now saying, oh no, sweetheart, that was a warm-up. The real number might climb all the way up to $8 billion. There have been some photos being passed around of a person by the name Abdul Dahir Ibrahim literally cheesing next to the Governor Tim Walz and Congresswoman Omar like they've been taking senior yearbook pictures. Minnesota didn't just have a fraud problem, they had a fraud festival, a buffet, a whole golden corral of corruption. Let's break down this disaster because somehow it got worse. Yes, worse. Let's get into it. All right, quick reset so we're all on the same page here. In the last video, we talked about how Minnesota blew past $1 billion in fake programs, ghost meal sites, fake autism therapy, housing scams, and how whistleblowers said that Tim Walz was responsible because he ignored the warnings, punished the people speaking up, and let everything spin completely out of control.
Some of the Minnesota cases intersect with earlier investigations into pandemic food aid fraud involving groups like Feeding Our Future, which federal prosecutors have called the largest pandemic fraud case in the history. More than 300 people have been charged in those broader investigations. But people want to know why Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison didn't act more quickly when concerns were first raised.
Most likely he did this because he wanted to protect the Somali voting base. There's a lot of them there, and he wanted to make sure that he continues to get reelected, so he probably turned a blind eye. Now, this can get worse if he is somehow implicated that he was profiting from this, but at the same time, we thought that was the whole story. That was before the Fed started going into Minnesota with the flashlight like, you know what, there's a lot going on here that we do not know. Because now 3 federal agencies, SBA, DHS, and the FBI are digging through the rubble, and they're finding some insane stuff.
2 days into the Small Business Administration's investigation, Secretary Kelly Loeffler says the agency has uncovered at least $1 million in PPP fraud. And the state itself is now looking into the possibility of fraud in another Medicaid program.
In just 2 days of looking. 2 days. I mean, this is a lifestyle of fraud that's going on here. Whistleblowers now say that if you stack up the PPP fraud, the Medicaid fraud, the autism therapy scams, the fake housing programs, the fake childhood licenses, and Feeding Our Future leftovers, Minnesota might be heading towards $8 billion stolen. $8 billion.
Several of the whistleblowers in Minnesota have told state lawmakers that by the time these investigations are through, they believe the actual size of this fraud, the amount of taxpayer dollars that has been stolen, could be higher than $8 billion. Governor Tim Walz, who is up for re-election, is under fire for all of this happening under his watch, but he says they have investigated every claim of fraud that's come in, something whistleblowers dispute, and says the state is taking the steps it needs to keep it from happening again.
It's hard to wrap your head around that kind of money. But when you look at the programs that they were scamming, allegedly, that's where the money is going. There was a housing program that was supposed to cost $3 million a year. The indictment shows that they somehow billed over $100 million in last year alone.
So one startling example sticking out concerns a program to help recovering addicts find stable housing. Initial estimates for the housing program was for just under $3 million annually. But an indictment shows grifters fraudulently billed Medicaid more than $100 million last year alone.
What are they housing? Like Marvel superheroes? The entire cast of every single 90s sitcom? How something jumps from $3 million to $100 million? This is why people are freaked out, especially if you live in Minnesota and you pay taxes, because they're paying real taxes and that money is vanishing out of the air and you have no idea where it's going. Another issue, the Minnesota Department of Human Services had to pause all disability provider licenses because applications went up 283%, while the number of people needing the services only grew 25%. So that's not growth, that's a land grab. That's everyone trying to get a plate at the same time. Minnesota just became the hottest franchise in the country, except instead of starting a Chick-fil-A, you just needed a printer and a good imagination to make stuff up and completely scam the government. Now we're gonna talk about this man that's been pictured with a lot of powerful people. The man's name is Abdul Dahir Ibrahim. If Minnesota fraud had a poster child, this guy might be it.
The man pictured is Abdul Dahir Ibrahim. He also has a prior conviction in Canada for asylum and welfare fraud. ICE tells Fox News Ibrahim was granted temporary protected status for 10 years, but should have never been eligible.
The man had a deportation order from 2004. He had a prior welfare fraud conviction in Canada. He still ended up in Minnesota, moving around freely. Now he's caught up in this massive fraud case. That's why you see all of these photos of him smiling with Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar and a lot of other powerful people in the state of Minnesota. That's why people are saying that Walz and Omar may have done something more than just took a picture with him. Now, is there anything official about them doing anything illegal? No. But the optics is already horrible. And most likely, if they turn a blind eye to any of this, the least thing that should happen is Tim Walz resigns or just gets beat out of office. And the same thing for Ilhan Omar. You cannot have a welfare fraud suspect that had problems in Canada for fraud and a deportation order and Minnesota charges posing with politicians like he is at a family reunion. This is what people mean when they say that the system was wide open. Minnesota was not doing any background checks. They weren't even doing anything. They were just letting everyone in and taking as much money as possible. And it worked. Why? Politicians back down because the Somali community is a major voting bloc. If you lose that block, you probably lose that area. And if you lose that area, you probably lose Minnesota. That's what they think. So leadership probably froze, not because they didn't see the fraud, but because they didn't want the headlines. This is when you know politics has failed, especially in Minnesota. When people care about optics, then protecting the people who are paying the taxes. We definitely have to check out the national security angle. Treasury investigators are looking into claims that a portion of stolen money may have found its way overseas, possibly to Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda-linked terror group. Now, it's still being investigated, but the fact that this is even on the table tells you everything about how big this failure was. At this point, it's not even just fraud. It could be foreign interference. Minnesota went from feeding our future to feeding someone else's future. Now, let's talk about Governor Walz. He's been taking a big beating this week, and he also had a whole press run this week. And instead of directly addressing the scale of the fraud and how much him and his administration has messed this stuff up, he spent most of his time criticizing Trump, calling Trump language dangerous, talking about community diversity, talking about Minnesota being triple rated. And also the dumbest thing he said was criminals came to Minnesota because it's well run.
The chaos that's coming out of Washington, the things that are happening there, we can't control that. But in Minnesota, we can control the ability to do what we do every single year, create good, solid budgets based on factual data. We're glad to report them. We will continue to try and make government more efficient. We will continue to take and tackle the issue of fraud, of people defrauding the people of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota.
So Minnesota is so well run that a bunch of criminals came over to steal billions of dollars from that state. How does that make any sense? Now, this government is saying that they're doing everything that they can and people are going to jail. But if you check out what the DHS staff were saying, that he retaliated against whistleblowers. So someone is lying. And it's probably not the people who are risking their job to tell the truth. It was a Soviet-style collapse. It was a cash machine for criminals. It's broken beyond repair. Minnesota's welfare system wasn't a safety net. It was an ATM with no PIN code. There's no way this man should be a politician if warnings were ignored, whistleblowers were being silenced, fraudsters was donating to campaigns, politicians feared losing the Somali vote, and deportation orders weren't enforced. These are the kind of things that is a career ender for multiple people. And now we have a man with a fraud record taking pictures with the governor. This is enough to flip elections. or at least you hope it's enough to flip an election, especially if you are a voter that lived there and realized that state employees was raising alarms about this for years. They were pressured to be quiet, and fraud programs grew over 100%, 200, 300, 400%, and no one stopped it. This is why people are calling for resignations, not because of immigration or not because of communities, because a government that ignored fraud is not a government. It's a vending machine for criminals. So now you have the feds all over this. Tim Walz is trying to deflect as much as possible, and I don't think it's going to work. I think there's going to be more indictments. There's going to probably be more leaks, more photos, and more whistleblowers talking about the situation. The story is not going to cool off. At this point, it's preheating. So we're going to see what's going to happen. Is the fraud number going to hit $8 billion? Is more licenses going to be frozen? Is the housing program, all these type of things? Well, the investigators get into who are the bigwigs, who are the major political figures that knew that this was happening and either profit from it or told people to ignore it. We'll see exactly what's happening. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Do you think Tim Walz failed Minnesota, or is the system so broken that anyone would have drowned in it? Let me know. Thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.